I have told this story a million and one times, especially because I went to counseling for a year and I met women after women after women after women. I've told the story a million times and I still don't have a good flow to it. I still don't get it right. So bear with me. I'm gonna try to make as little cuts as possible in this video, but if there's a million, forgive me ahead of time. If I'm looking this way, it's because my window's open and I can see who comes to and from the front door. And it looks like there was an Amazon driver who just came. Anywho, my grandparents on my mom's side were my primary babysitters. So I went to daycare, and then after daycare, every single day they picked me up and they were responsible for me until one of my parents, my dad or my mom, came to pick me up. Mind you, my parents are divorced, so that may be helpful going forward. But from my understanding, from the time I was a newborn baby until I was about 6 years old, my grandfather sexually abused me. And this consisted of him touching me in places that he shouldn't, him asking me to do things that I shouldn't have been asked to do, and him saying things that he shouldn't have said to me. While all of this was happening, going on for like 5 or 6 years, he would always make it a point to mention the secrecy of it, like don't tell anybody this or X, Y, and Z will happen. So blackmailing, guilt trip, and only for that reason did I know that what he was doing was very wrong. I had enough understanding to know, okay, if he's asking me to keep something very, very, very private, then there must be something wrong with it. And honestly, since it was all that I'd kind of known my whole life and up to that point, it was normalized for me. It was normal. I went over to grandparents' house and this happened, and I expected it to happen, which is obviously completely unhealthy and so sad, but it was an expectation that I had. There was never a time that I went over there where I remember like being untouched, where I wasn't the victim. So that happened up until I was 6, like I said. The whole time this was going on, mind you, because this will be important later, my grandmother, I believed that my grandmother knew and never said anything. I believed that she didn't care about me or else she would have done something. I believed at 6 years old that she neglected me, or that my well-being was not more important than her marriage. So at 6 years old, I'm under all of these impressions, wrong impressions, mind you, but at the time they were true for me. 6 years old, around that time, I had accidentally let something slip out of my mouth to my stepmom. I believe it was my stepmom. I don't remember what it was that I said. I'm sure she knows and I could figure it out if I asked her, but I said something that insinuated I was being sexually abused by him. So she immediately calls my dad, who at the time was deployed, so he wasn't in the country. He had the least amount of room at the time to do anything about it because of where he was. I just remember it being a huge commotion. I accidentally said something to my stepmom. My stepmom's furious. She's questioning me left and right, and I don't know how to answer her because I'm under the impression that I'm not even supposed to say what I just said. Like, I'm gonna say as little as I can right now. So she's asking me questions. I remember being very timid to answer them just because I didn't want to get in any trouble with my grandparents. So she calls my dad whenever he's able to get a chance to talk, and he like automatically goes and said, I'm never going over there again. Like, I'm not allowed over there. I'm not allowed to talk to him. I'm not allowed to talk to her. My mom finds out as well. They're all communicating. They come to that conclusion that I'm not allowed to go over there, stay over there anymore, which I remember being a very bittersweet thing because one, it was like, yes, I'm home free. I don't have to deal with this anymore. But two, me and my grandmother, though I thought all of those things towards her, we were very, very, very close. I had the best relationship with my grandmother prior to being taken out of the home. 6 years old, I'm never allowed over there again. And then fast forward maybe 2 or 3 years, my grandfather dies. He passed away, and I just remember being honestly overjoyed. His death meant that he couldn't touch me anymore. His death meant that I could finally see my grandmother, and his death in my mind at the time, I could forget about all of that and I would never have to deal with it again. That is a lie. But that's what I thought at 8 or 9 years old. He passed away. I did go to the funeral. I remember having a pretty good understanding of what was happening even though I was so young. After he passed away, I still saw my grandmother, or I started seeing her again. I remember it being so different. The dynamic in our household was very different than it was whenever I was younger. Our relationship was very different because remember we'd spent 2 or 3 years apart, and that just kind of ruined things for us. It ruined the growth of our relationship. And then 2 or 3 years later, I'm coming back into her home with all of these negative and awful judgments towards her, which only put a strain on our relationship, even at 8 and 9 years old. So we'll put that small story, that's its own. We'll put that on pause for a second. Fast forward to when I was 11 or 12. Oh, my battery's gonna die. Okay, I'll finish this quicker. 11 or 12, I was sexually abused by a woman. And that experience was very different from what I experienced when I was a baby, only because this time I knew it was wrong. 100,000,000% I knew it was wrong. The second it happened, I had told somebody. And I remember when I told my dad, it was a huge deal again in our family. And I remember seeing the disappointment in my parents' face of like, oh my gosh, we like didn't just fail her once, but we failed her twice. And ugh. My sexual abuse story doesn't ever make me emotional anymore. I've done so much healing. It just, thinking of my dad crying just makes me want to cry. Okay, so moving on. So I was sexually abused again when I was 11 by a woman, and that just messed things up in my head for a while. It messed up what I believe sexuality was. It messed up what my ideals of what relationship should look like, what sex should look like, what love and intimacy and healthy boundaries should look like. It messed up all of these things for me, and it messed it up until I was about 17. It ruined a lot for me going forward. Fast forward to when I was 16, 17, I started dating a guy. Not anything too serious, but serious enough that it blurred every line in my head. What was a healthy boundary? What was an unhealthy boundary? They were gray areas to me. What was a healthy sexuality? What was unhealthy sexuality? They blurred together for me. What does a healthy dating relationship look like? What does an unhealthy one look like? I couldn't differentiate between a bunch. Okay, so I'm in this dating relationship. I'm freaking confused as heck. I end that relationship and I start going to counseling. I ended that relationship because things were very confusing, and I remember talking to my parents about it, and they said, hey, there's this program. It's called Bethesda. They specialize in sexual abuse. I think that you could benefit from it. We're not going to force you, but we think it's time that you've addressed this trauma, that you've healed from this trauma. At 17, I was like, there's not like that much trauma that abuse has left me with. Like, I'm fine. I've kind of managed up until this point. Like, what healing do I have to do? It happened when I was a baby. And that was just the most ignorant thinking of my life. It blows my mind that I actually had those thoughts at one point. Crazy. So at 18 years old, I went to Bethesda. It was a year program. I did the hardest of work mentally and emotionally at this institution. I could speak forever on counseling, and that may be like a whole nother story someday, but long story short, I went there for a year, did what I needed to do, got the work done that I needed to get done, and experienced healing like I had never before. While I was in counseling, I realized, this abuse did leave me with very deep-rooted wounds. This abuse left me with 1,000,001 questions. This abuse left me feeling unworthy and dirty and gross. It was only whenever I began to open my mouth about it and to allow myself to mentally go to those places again that I realized there was so much hidden under the surface. And when I brought all of that to light, I experienced healing like never before, and I'm so grateful to my Father in heaven for it. Still one of like the greatest testimonies and my favorite to tell. In the midst, maybe halfway through counseling, I was talking to my counselor. I said, yeah, my relationship with my grandma, like, it's not perfect. We kind of went our separate ways after my abuse happened, after my grandfather died. It was just easier to not have a relationship with her than to try to pursue superficial one. And my counselor encouraged me to have a conversation with her. So it took me a very long time. I did it on my own terms, but I went over to my grandmother's house and I sat with her and I asked her all of the questions that came to mind. Some of those being, why did you let this happen to me? And she assured me that she did not allow it to happen to me. I said, did you know that it was happening when it was happening? And she assured me that she knew something was going on, just because whenever he would hug me, I would try to pry my way out of it. When he would get close to me, I would get fidgety, she said. So there were some things here and there that made me think that something was odd or off with you, but it never made her question it to the point of abuse. And so she apologized and she said, I wish I would have investigated further, and I wish I would have pursued your voice in your relationship more than I did. And she was crying and she was so apologetic, and that communication was so needed for me, just so I could continue this healing process, but also for our relationship, because now it is it's obvious, like, it's not 100%. There's growth and that takes time. But it is way, 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 way better. And she's gained so much of my trust back. And it was unfair of me for so long to believe all these assumptions that I had made when I was 6 or 7. So in a nutshell, that's my sexual abuse story. If there are specific questions, I would love to make more videos or just even small short stories on Instagram to answer those. I know that I didn't like go crazy into detail. My hope for everyone and anyone watching this, and my deepest prayer, is that if anything, at the very least, you just don't feel alone. I wish that through all of my 18 years of life, that I had gone without talking about it or addressing it, even to myself. Like, even in my own thoughts in my own head, I never even addressed it with myself. If I would have a memory, I would suppress it. If I had a thought, I would suppress it. Because I didn't know how to process it, and I never heard anybody else talk about it, so it wasn't normalized for me. It was a very dirty and odd and shameful topic for me. So if anything, I just want you to feel not alone. And if you're somebody who's not been sexually abused, then thank the Father for that, because the statistics for it are insanely high. It's ridiculous. But if you're not somebody who's been sexually abused, then I'm here to educate you. I'm here to tell you my story. I'm here to shine some light on an area that I feel deserves it. I actually went back to that institution today that I had gone to for a year, Bethesda, and I got to talk to 13 and 14-year-old girls who have experienced sexual trauma, and I got to tell them my story. I got to relate with them. I got to answer their questions. I got to let them know that, hey, you're not alone. Like, I know I'm older, but actually, like, I didn't start dealing with this stuff until I was 4 or 5 years older than you. Like, you're way ahead of the game, and I got to encourage them. But I want to do the same for you. If you're somebody who's been sexually abused or harassed or even made uncomfortable, or somebody dishonored your no, these are all valid experiences, and I want to say sorry, and that I understand, and I'm with you, and my heart hurts with you and for you. But also, there's hope and there's healing available. The Father's heart is so for you, and there are counselors out there who want to fight with you and want to fight for you too. Okay, with my story complete and my 2 cents aside, I do want to say, if you're somebody who's been sexually abused, you're not alone. And if you're somebody who's been sexually abused and you've not told anybody, you're not alone. I went 5 years without saying something, and it was a very lonely time, and it was a very lonely place, even at 5, 6 years old. And you've not given yourself the time or the space to feel all of those things and heal from all of the trauma. I couldn't encourage you enough to talk about it to a trusted adult, to talk about it with a counselor, to seek the Father's heart and what he has to say and the healing that he has available for you. I went 10 plus years without remotely even touching the subject of sexual abuse because of my fear and because of my shame. And I think if I would have let those things hold me back from my healing for longer, I would have continuously kept myself from a relationship with my grandmother, mended relationships in my family, because not only did it heal up relationships with my grandmother, it was everybody in my family, because it was something that went untouched for so long. It was just a subject that we kind of avoided, which is not a healthy way to go about things. For those of you who are curious, I will link the website of the institution that I went to for my healing. Mind you, I live in Metro, Oklahoma, so it will probably only be available to those of you who live in a similar area. And their program is for people 18 and younger. Remember, whenever I went, I had gone just in time. But that's not the only program available. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you're encouraged. Scripture says that there's power in our testimony. By the blood of the Lamb we are healed, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I can do this. I can do this. I've found like a new seating position every 2 seconds. Okay. Where was I at? Oh yes, okay.